In 2025, Roger Federer officially joined the billion-dollar net worth club, a milestone that only a handful of athletes in history have ever reached. But here's the twist. Federer wasn't the first tennis star to do it. That honor belongs to Ion Țiriac, a mustachioed Romanian hustler who turned himself from a Davis Cup grinder into the sport's very first billionaire. But long before his empire of banks, car dealerships, and tournament ownerships, Tiriac's first big move was transforming Guillermo Vilas, a poetic Argentine with all the talent in the world, into a ruthless champion. This is the story of how Ion Țiriac turned Guillermo Vilas into a tennis beast, and in the process began his own transformation into one of tennis's most formidable forces. So who was Ion Țiriac? Before he became a billionaire, Ion Țiriac was just a scrappy kid from post-war Romania. Born in Brașov in 1939, he grew up in a country behind the Iron Curtain, where survival demanded toughness and ingenuity. He wasn't the most naturally gifted tennis player of his generation. In fact, he started out as an ice hockey player and even represented Romania in the 1964 Winter Olympics before switching full-time to tennis. That tells you everything about his grit. He wasn't born into tennis privilege, he fought his way into it. Țiriac made his name in doubles, partnering with the flamboyant Ilie Nastase. Together, they became one of the most notorious pairs of the era, capturing the 1970 French Open. Where Nastase brought artistry and flair, Țiriac brought streetwise calculation and brute competitiveness. He was Romania's Davis Cup workhorse, grinding out matches that dragged on for hours, often more brawler than stylist. But it wasn't just on court that Țiriac stood out. Off the court, he was already building a reputation as a hustler, the kind of guy who could talk his way into deals, charm sponsors, and spot opportunities others missed. Players joked that Țiriac could sell anything, negotiate with anyone, and never walk away second best. This combination, the survivor's instinct, the discipline of an Olympic athlete, and the cunning of a born dealmaker, would eventually make him the perfect match for Guillermo Vilas. Where Vilas had all the talent in the world, Țiriac had the steel to shape it into something unstoppable. By the mid-1970s, Guillermo Vilas had already established himself as South America's first true tennis superstar. He had the heavy topspin forehand, the stamina to battle for hours, and the artistry that made him a fan favorite. But despite all that, one thing was glaringly absent from his resume. In 6 full seasons of Grand Slam tennis, Vilas had never won a major. His best chance came at Roland Garros in 1975, where he reached the final only to lose in straight sets to Bjorn Borg. It wasn't as though Vilas wasn't winning. By then, he already had 19 Grand Prix titles, including the prestigious year-end championships. He was ranked among the very best in the world. But the one trophy that defined greatness, a Grand Slam, still eluded him. And for a player as ambitious as Vilas, that void grew harder to ignore. That's when Ion Țiriac entered the picture. The grizzled Romanian with his trademark mustache and hustler's charm was the polar opposite of Vilas. Where Vilas wrote poetry, Țiriac barked orders. Where Vilas saw tennis as art, Țiriac saw it as combat. At first glance, it seemed like an odd pairing. One was a sensitive guitar-playing Argentine who quoted philosophy. The other, a tough-as-nails ex-ice hockey Olympian who treated discipline like religion. But that contrast was exactly what made the partnership work. Ion Țiriac didn't believe in shortcuts. If Guillermo Vilas wanted to win a Grand Slam, he was going to have to earn it the hard way. The training was brutal. Hours of practice, aerobic drills, endless matches, and no off days. At first, Vilas resisted. He was used to seeing tennis as artistic expression, but Țiriac saw it as war. He barked orders, demanded discipline, and eliminated excuses. And then the breakthrough came. At the 1977 French Open, Vilas crushed Brian Gottfried 6-0, 6-3, 6-0 in the final to win his first ever Grand Slam title. The dominance was total, and by doing so, he erased years of frustration. But he didn't stop. Later that year at the U.S. Open, still played on clay at Forest Hills, he faced defending champion Jimmy Connors, a man at the top of the sport. After dropping the first set, 2-6 Vilas turned it around to win 6-3, 7-6, 6-0, a major upset over a top dog in a major final. Those victories turned the tide. The transformation Țiriac had engineered was complete. Vilas, once the eternal challenger, had now claimed 2 Grand Slams. He ended 1977 with a staggering 145-14 record and around 17 titles, proof that the warrior had supplanted the poet. For Ion Țiriac, guiding Guillermo Vilas to Grand Slam glory wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The success proved his methods worked. It gave him credibility, not just as a former player, but as a man who could build champions, and soon he would prove it again. In the 1980s, Țiriac began managing a teenage prodigy from West Germany named Boris Becker. With Țiriac in his corner, Becker stormed to the Wimbledon title in 1985 at just 17 years old, becoming the youngest men's champion in history. Tiriac wasn't just a coach or mentor anymore. He was now a super agent, orchestrating deals, endorsements, and careers from the sidelines. With Vilas, he had shown he could mold talent into a champion. With Becker, he showed he could take a superstar and turn him into a global brand. But he didn't stop at players. Țiriac turned his business instincts toward the sport itself, investing in and later owning tournaments. His crown jewel became the Madrid Open, which he transformed into one of the premier events on the tennis calendar. He even famously experimented with blue clay courts in 2012, a move that drew player protests from the likes of Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic, but showed his willingness to push boundaries. By the 1990s and 2000s, Țiriac had expanded far beyond tennis. Banking, insurance, real estate, car dealerships, he built an empire in post-communist Romania, eventually becoming the country's richest man. In the process, he achieved something no Grand Slam champion had done. He became tennis's first billionaire. Ion Țiriac didn't just become wealthy, he became larger than life. By the 2000s, he was a billionaire with a sprawling business empire, a garage filled with more than 400 luxury and vintage cars, and a reputation for doing things his way. The mustache, the cigars, the sharp suits. Țiriac looked more like a movie villain than a tennis manager, and in many ways he relished the role. He wasn't a product of the polished Western tennis system. He came from communist Romania, fought his way up, and never forgot the hustler's mindset that had carried him through. Inside the tennis world, he was seen as an outsider, but one with undeniable power. He didn't hesitate to challenge the ATP or the ITF, especially when he felt players weren't getting a fair share of the pie. His experiments, like staging the Madrid Open on blue clay in 2012, showed both his boldness and his willingness to irritate the establishment. Players complained. Nadal and Djokovic even threatened boycotts, but Țiriac had made his point. He could bend the sport to his vision. And through it all, he never shied away from controversy. Journalists called him ruthless. Others called him visionary. To his critics, he was brash. To his admirers, he was brilliant. But to everyone, he was unmistakable. For all the extravagance, the cars, the cigars, the blue clay courts, Ion Țiriac was never just about showmanship. Beneath the flamboyant exterior was a man who had reshaped tennis in ways few could match. And it all goes back to where it began, with Guillermo Vilas. The partnership that transformed the Argentine into a Grand Slam champion also set Țiriac on the path to becoming tennis's first billionaire. Which leaves us with the bigger question: how should he truly be remembered? Jan Țiriac's story is unlike anyone else's in tennis. He wasn't a singles Grand Slam champion. He wasn't the most gifted player of his generation. Yet, through sheer toughness, cunning, and vision, he left a bigger mark on the sport than many who lifted more trophies. For Guillermo Vilas, Țiriac was the missing piece, the man who turned raw artistry into ruthless winning. For Boris Becker and the others, he was the super agent who made them into global stars. And for tennis itself, he became a power broker, tournament owner, and the sport's first billionaire. But how should he be remembered? As the hustler with the mustache who bent tennis to his will? As the ruthless manager who broke players down and built them back up? Or as the visionary who showed that tennis could be more than a game, it could be an empire? That's the question his legacy leaves us with. So, what do you think? Was Ion Țiriac tennis's greatest hustler, its greatest visionary, or both? Let us know in the comments below. Also subscribe to our channel for more of these stories with Ultimate Tennis Guru.